Here's something wild. The other day, 100 million people sat frozen in front of glowing screens, collectively screaming at strangers in tight pants, throwing a ball back and forth. Meanwhile, millions more were out living their lives, organizing sock drawers, reading books, literally doing anything else, with zero emotional investment in any of it. And I'm not talking about contrarians performing indifference for social credit. I mean genuine, complete apathy. The kind where Super Bowl hype registers the same way professional lawn bowling would, just blank confusion. And the psychology behind that disconnect? Way more interesting than the game itself. So let's unpack this. Here's the thing nobody wants to admit. Getting hyped about sports isn't built into human DNA. You weren't born with some genetic code that makes you scream at strangers in jerseys. What's really going on when people go crazy for the Super Bowl is this complicated cocktail of social conditioning, parasocial attachment, and something psychologists call identification with sports teams. Basically, your brain tricks you into thinking the success or failure of people you've never met somehow reflects on you personally. Wild, right? There's this phenomenon where fans literally say, "We won," when their team scores, even though they were sitting on a couch eating nachos the entire time. That's not an accident. Your nervous system is genuinely releasing dopamine when your team succeeds, creating this artificial sense of achievement. It's the same neurochemical reward you'd get from actually accomplishing something, except you did nothing. For people who don't care about the Super Bowl, watching this happen is kind of like watching someone get a dopamine hit from a random number generator. Like, sure, you can trick your brain into finding meaning there, but why would you? And there's actual neuroscience backing this up. Research shows people have completely different baseline arousal levels, partly driven by how their dopamine and norepinephrine systems are calibrated. Some brains actively seek out high-stakes, emotionally intense situations because that's where they feel most alive. Other brains find that exact same intensity overwhelming and draining. It's not about being better or worse. It's about how your nervous system is wired. So when someone says the Super Bowl doesn't do it for them, they might literally mean their neurochemistry finds 3 hours of manufactured drama exhausting instead of exhilarating. Think about the actual experience for a second. You're watching a game where the outcome changes every 30 seconds. Momentum swings, controversial calls, last-minute comebacks. For some people, that's thrilling. For others, it's just anxiety with extra steps. And when you don't actually care who wins, all that emotional roller coaster stuff just feels pointless. You're not on a ride. You're just standing there watching other people scream on a ride you have no interest in boarding. Now let's talk about the tribal psychology thing, because this is where it gets really interesting. Humans evolved to form groups and compete against other groups. That's literally how we survived. Sports plug directly into that ancient wiring. When you watch your team play, your brain is basically running the same software it used when your ancestors defended territory from rival clans. The uniforms, the territorial stadiums, the us versus them language. It's all triggering those deep evolutionary patterns. But here's what's fascinating. Not everyone experiences that tribal pull with the same intensity. Some people get their belonging fix from completely different sources. Maybe it's online communities about vintage synthesizers. Maybe it's local theater groups. Maybe it's literally anything that doesn't require you to care which millionaire catches a ball better than another millionaire. They're not broken or antisocial. They've just found their tribe in spaces that don't involve memorizing play formations or arguing about referee decisions for 3 days straight. There's also this psychological concept worth bringing up: internal versus external locus of control. Essentially, do you naturally gravitate toward investing energy in things you can influence, or are you comfortable pouring emotions into situations completely outside your control? When you're watching a game, you have literally zero impact on what happens. You can wear your lucky hat, you can do rituals, you can yell at the TV. None of it matters. The outcome is entirely independent of your existence. Some people are totally cool with that arrangement. The emotional experience is the whole point for them, but others find it fundamentally unsatisfying. If they're going to invest emotional energy, they want it to go somewhere productive. They'd rather spend that energy on projects, relationships, hobbies, where their input actually changes the result. Neither mindset is superior, they're just different operating systems. And can we talk about overstimulation for a second? Because this feels relevant. Modern life already bombards you with constant inputs, notifications exploding, work demands, social media chaos, political madness, financial stress, the news cycle from hell. For a lot of people, the Super Bowl is just another loud thing demanding their attention and emotional bandwidth when they've got nothing left to give. Especially for people who fall into what psychologists call the highly sensitive category, which is roughly 20% of the population. The Super Bowl experience is basically sensory overload packaged as entertainment. The crowded parties, the constant noise, the bright lights, the non-stop stimulation. What feels like a celebration to some people feels like punishment to others. They're not being difficult, their nervous system literally processes sensory input differently, and what's fun for you might genuinely feel like torture for them. Here's another layer: tolerance for uncertainty. There's research showing massive variation in how comfortable people are with unpredictability and ambiguity. Sports are fundamentally uncertain. That's supposedly the appeal. You never know what'll happen next. But for people with lower uncertainty tolerance, that same unpredictability doesn't create excitement. It creates discomfort. They're sitting there for 3 hours experiencing low-grade stress over something that literally doesn't affect their actual life in any meaningful way. When you combine that with the fact that the outcome is completely irrelevant to anything that matters, sitting through hours of manufactured suspense starts feeling less like entertainment and more like choosing to be anxious for no reason. It's the same phenomenon with horror movies. Some people love the adrenaline. Others hate feeling scared, even in a safe context. Different nervous systems process stress differently, even when it's supposedly just for fun. And then there's the cultural spectacle of it all. The Super Bowl stopped being just a football game decades ago. Now it's this massive cultural event with the commercials that supposedly matter, the halftime show everyone dissects, the themed food, the branded everything. If you don't care about football, all that additional hype makes it worse, not better. Now you're surrounded by people performing enthusiasm for something you find completely random, and you're supposed to join in and analyze the ads and pretend the halftime performance matters. It feels performative, inauthentic. You end up watching people get worked up over something that registers as noise to you, and you're expected to match their energy. That disconnect creates this weird isolation where you're physically present but emotionally on a different planet. It's not just boring, it's alienating in a way that's hard to articulate without sounding like you're judging everyone else. But let's be honest about something else. Sometimes there's no complex psychological framework. Sometimes people just don't like football, the same way some people don't like jazz or mushrooms or reality TV. We've gotten so obsessed with explaining and diagnosing every difference that we've forgotten people just have preferences. That's it. That's the whole explanation sometimes. The person who doesn't care about the Super Bowl might be absolutely obsessed with hockey or tennis or competitive gaming or literally any other thing. Their preference doesn't require neurological justification. The assumption that everyone should care about the Super Bowl is honestly stranger than not caring about it. But here's something the conversation usually misses entirely. There's an attention economy angle here that's worth examining. Your attention is arguably the most valuable resource you have. It's finite, it's non-renewable. And in 2026, everything is designed to capture it. The Super Bowl isn't just asking for your time, it's asking for your emotional bandwidth, your mental energy, your conversational currency for the next week. For some people, investing that attention feels like a bad trade. They're not just uninterested in football, they're actively protecting their attention from things that don't align with what they're building or who they're becoming. It's less about rejecting the Super Bowl and more about what psychologists call identity alignment. Does this use of my attention reflect the person I'm trying to be? For people who answer no, opting out isn't passive disinterest. It's active curation of their psychological real estate. And there's another dimension here that almost never gets discussed: identity outsourcing. When you invest heavily in sports fandom, you're partially outsourcing your emotional state to external events you can't control. Your mood on Monday depends on what happens Sunday. Your sense of pride or disappointment is tied to the performance of strangers. Some people are perfectly comfortable with that exchange. Others find it fundamentally misaligned with how they want to construct their sense of self. They'd rather their emotional baseline be determined by things they actually participate in, not things they spectate. What I find most fascinating is the reaction people have when you tell them you don't care. There's this immediate defensiveness, like you've personally attacked them. And that response reveals everything about how sports function as cultural identity markers. When you reject the Super Bowl, some people don't hear, "I'm not interested in this game." They hear, "I'm rejecting your community, your values, your entire way of connecting with people." It's not really about football. It's about belonging, shared cultural experience, and maybe some underlying anxiety that if enough people opt out, the whole thing loses its cultural weight. Your indifference threatens the collective agreement that this matters, which is probably why people get so defensive when you're just honest about not caring. It's the same energy as someone getting upset when you don't recognize a celebrity they love. Your lack of participation makes their investment feel slightly less validated. So if you're someone who didn't care about the Super Bowl yesterday, it could be any combination of these things. Maybe you run at a lower stimulation baseline. Maybe you prefer directing energy toward things you can actually control. Maybe you're not wired for competitive sports enthusiasm. Maybe the spectacle feels exhausting. Maybe uncertainty creates stress instead of excitement. Or maybe you just genuinely find it boring, and that's completely sufficient as an explanation. All of those are legitimate ways to exist. And if you're someone who lived for yesterday's Super Bowl, that's equally legitimate. We don't all need to experience the world identically. That diversity of interest is probably what keeps society functional. You can have 100 million people completely losing it over a football game, while millions of others are perfectly content doing literally anything else. And somehow we all manage to coexist without the world ending. That's the whole point. If this resonated with you, go ahead and subscribe. I genuinely appreciate your support. See you in the next one.